All right, continuing with non-writing prophets. Looking at 2 Kings 4:38 through 41, talking about Elisha and the fellow students of his as they are going on. Now, that's not see the pottage, that's see the pottage. They lived at a time of famine. And you know, when, Matthew puts it this way, that the rain falls upon the just and the unjust. And we could illustrate that by saying, if you, back in the day when farmers would go out there and they'd plow the fields and they'd plant the crops and they'd work from sun up to sundown, that when they went home, they would go home and pray for rain before they had irrigation systems, you know. So they would pray and ask God for rain. And they had a neighbor who lived beside them who was wicked. Well, if it rained on the guys praying for his crops, it rained on his crops too. You know, things affect other people. And so if there's a famine in the land, that famine not only affects the wicked people, it affects the righteous as well. If our God is judging the United States, it's not just the lost people that's going to be judged, it's the righteous going to be judged as well. So again, the rain falls upon the just and the unjust. So seethe means to boil.
A what?
To boil. And so, and pottage basically means stew. And so it's just a boiled stew. What they did is they gathered up different things together and put them in one big pot and to make a stew out of it for all of them to eat. 2 Kings 4:38 through 41 says, and Elisha came to Gilgal, came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth, or a famine in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said unto his servant, set on the great pot, and seethe pottage, or boil the stew, for the sons of the prophets. Well, verse 39, one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered thereof wild gourds his lapful, and came and shred them into the pot of pottage. For they knew them not. He didn't know what he gathered. He just thought, this looks good. I'll cut it up, put it in the pot. So they poured out, verse 40, for the men to eat. It came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, that they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat thereof. But he said, then bring meal, and he cast it into the pot, and said, pour out for the people that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. So one guy mistakenly put something in that was poisonous, and they realized that, and so they're in trouble. And Elijah said, put some meal in. It wasn't that the meal cured the pot, it was simply an act of obedience. God cured the pot so that they could eat. The point is, though, again, when the lost people, the wicked people had problems, so did the righteous. So it's not like the stock market falls all apart and everybody's stock falls that are wicked, and all the righteous people's stocks go up. You know, it just doesn't work that way. It's not the way God works. God has it affect the righteous as well, because the only people that can pray to overcome the judgment is the righteous people. You know, it's like if sin only affected the lost people, and when bad things happen, we wouldn't pray. You know, well, it's not affecting me, why should I pray about it? Well, if it affects us, we all pray about it. So the famine and the pot of stew. The Lord used this famine, I don't know why I had the word "and" in there. The Lord used this famine to illustrate certain truths and to teach the reality of God's covenant with Israel. Back in Deuteronomy 28, usually that's a chapter I primarily use. It's actually 28 to 30, but 28 is the basis of the blessings and cursings. First 15 verses, God said, I will, if you do the right thing, you follow after me, when your enemies come before you, they will flee 7 different ways. But then verse 16 to the end of the book, it basically says, but if you don't follow me, when your enemies come before you, you will flee 7 different ways. And so the blessings and the cursings and the importance of that. Now that chapters were very important to the history of Israel and to the future of Israel. Because God told Moses in Deuteronomy that when you get into the promised land, you will come to the valley of Shechem. In the valley of Shechem, there'll be two mountains, and I've talked about this in other classes, but there'll be two mountains, Mount Ebal on one side, Mount Gerizim on the other. Now, Mount Ebal was barren, and so that was a mount of cursing. Mount Gerizim, on the other hand, had vegetation, so that was a mount of blessing. And so anytime anybody passed through that valley, they can see a barren mountain on one side and a flourishing mountain on the other side. And so God told Moses when they got there, I want you to read Deuteronomy 28 through 30, gather all the people together. Of course, Moses ended up being disqualified from going into the promised land, so it was left for Joshua to do. In the midst of one of the battles that Joshua was having with the Canaanites, when they got to the valley of Shechem, he realized where they were at, and so he had this fighting to stop and do what God told him to do. So he had the priests read the word to the people, gather the people together, and showed the Mount Gerizim vegetation, Mount Ebal barren. A constant reminder that if you do the right thing, God will bless. If you do the wrong thing, you'll be like Mount Ebal and be cursed. Well, here God is using this famine to illustrate that as a nation you turned against me, so therefore my covenant with you is in place. You know, God's covenant was, not only will I bless you if you do the right thing, God's covenant was just as equally, but I will curse you if you do the wrong thing. And people forget that. People think, well, God is only supposed to do good things for us. God's not supposed to do bad things to us. Well, if we deserve to be punished, we deserve to be punished. And if God doesn't punish us, like we said before, if God doesn't punish us, we're going to keep on doing it. And so it is important to learn from the teachings of God. When a nation turns away from the Lord, it not only reaps what it has sown and brings on itself the judgment of God, but the godly who are left also suffer. As were these prophets, as Elisha was a man of God, we know that. His followers were men of God, we know that. But when there's famine in the land, you know what happened to them? They got hungry. And so much so that they should gather up anything they can find that looked good. And unknowingly put poison within the pot. Reminds me of Philippians chapter 4 when Paul said, he said, I've learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know how to be full, and he says, and I know how to be hungry. And when I'm full, I'm content, and when I'm hungry, I've learned how to be content with that as well. So, in our Christian lives, we're not always going to have all of our groceries. There's sometimes when we don't have all of our groceries. And a lot of those times are the times we look back and remember fondly. When things were rough, and we look back and thought, you know, we didn't have much, and all, but God just provided, and we look back, and those were the good old days. You know, the times when we had plenty, we don't think of as the good old days, but the times when God delivered us are the good old days. Well, that's what happens here. Even though God would and did supply their needs, they were still suffering the consequences of idolatry. When the nation of Israel turned against God, this is the time they could look back years later and tell their children. Oh, let me tell you about the time we were with Elisha that day, and somebody got some mines and put it in the stew, and it was poisonous. And we ate of it. And God interceded on our behalf and healed us. And we weren't hurt by that. You know, what a great story. If nothing happened and they just ate and finished the meal, they'd never tell that story again. But they had something to look back on of the blessings of God. So it's a reminder to them to function as light and salt, to illuminate the darkness as light, and to preserve the nation as salt. We have a responsibility to be a light in this world and to be the salt of the earth. Matthew 5:13 says, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but the salt have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted?" And I've talked about this before. Remember I brought salt from the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea. And that salt, that's how long it's been crystallized into salt. It's 30 years old this year that I brought it over. It's still salty. So how does salt lose its savor? There's only one way. And that's when you mix it with something else. You know, if you're cooking brown beans or pinto beans, brown beans in West pinto beans, and you put too much salt in, then what do you have to do to reduce the salt? You add more water. You mix with something else. As believers, we're to be the salt of the earth. But if we're no longer salty, that means what happened? Well, we've mixed ourselves with the world, so we're not effective anymore. Because if we look like the world and act like the world and talk like the world's not going to listen to us. Tough times give opportunity for the people of God. When there's poison in the stew, well, those are tough times. So it gives us opportunity. We need to be equipped to reach out to a lost and hurting society. Malachi 3:16, Hebrews 10:24 and 25 both talk about our relationship with God, fellowship with God, and with one another. And the fellowship with God and fellowship with one another encourages us to be witnesses in this world. The miracle of the bread in 2 Kings 4:42 through 44 says, "There came a man from Baal Shalisha and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits." Now, the man of God being Elisha and his followers. He brought 20 loaves of barley and full ears of corn in the husk thereof. And he said, "Give unto the people that they may eat." And the servitor said, "What, should I set this before 100 men? So, although on the surface it might sound like a lot, they brought 20 loaves of barley, full ears of corn. It wasn't near enough. Right? And so the servitor said, "Well, should I set this before 100 men? He said, "Give the people that they may eat. For thus saith the Lord, they shall eat and shall leave thereof." Of course, should remind you of the fish and loaves in the New Testament. And they shall eat and shall leave thereof. So he said before them, and they did eat and left thereof, according to the word of the Lord. They had enough to eat and they had leftovers. God has given the responsibility of carrying his word to an idolatrous nation, to these men. Elisha, his followers, and others that were around there, not just men, but probably families. So it was their responsibility to carry the word. And they had great need. They were hungry. And this man from Cilicia brought what he had, but it wasn't enough. I mentioned before with Hannah and others, but people of God face personal hardship, persecutions, and times of want. Want is an old English word which means need. You know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I remember as a kid hearing that and thinking, if God's our shepherd, why would we want him? Not understanding that the word want in that passage is the Lord is my shepherd, I shall have no need of anything else. The people of God do face personal hardship. They are persecuted. They do have times when they don't have all that they need. And so when these things come, well, of course, we are to trust God. But trusting God means we still are hungry, and we still are persecuted, and we still have needs. Very importantly, we have needs, but we also, at the same time, still have responsibilities. So in our times of trouble, we still have a great responsibility to other people. Some of our responsibilities here are to use our gifts, whatever spiritual gift God has given you. It may be the gift of compassion, the gift of administration, and the gift of service, the gift of teaching, the gift of whatever gift that God has given you. We have a responsibility to use our gifts, to use our talents. Some people tend to think gifts and talents are the same thing, and they're not. Your talent may be music, whatever it might be, whatever you're building. It might be sewing. I mean, who knows? Whatever. Working on cars. You may be able to help somebody else out who's having troubles. We use our talents. Our responsibility is, very important, is to pray. We're always to be able to pray. To care for others. We have a responsibility to love God. Anne was dealing with somebody right now who's going through tough times in her life, and she says she kind of lost faith in God. And then says things like, I don't understand why God is allowing this to happen. And I'm thinking, think about what you say. I've lost faith in God, and I believe God is allowing things to happen, so it means that they still believe in God. So why would you say God is not in control and still believe in God? And it's because they're looking selfishly at their own life rather than looking to God for the answers. God is in control, and I'm not saying this person's not saved at all. I'm just saying sometimes when we just are so self-centered, we forget, that we've still got these responsibilities to show the love of God. God allows things to happen in our life. He won't allow more to happen than what we can handle. We'll always be able to handle anything God puts on us. It may not seem like it at the time, but when we need God's grace is given then. We're responsible to love others. And we have a great responsibility to study the Word. So no matter what situation we're facing in life, if you're going through a very tough time right now and the whole world's falling down around you, we still have these responsibilities. And when we have these responsibilities, you'll notice these responsibilities are things we do for other people. And when we do for other people, then we forget about ourselves. When I first got saved, I had very, very poor self-image. And I would believe that God would save anybody who would ask Him for salvation, except for me. I mean, I did get saved, but I had a hard time believing that God would save me. And what helped me to overcome that is when I got really involved in the church and going out on visitation and witnessing people and doing things, and I forgot to dwell upon my own self. And I was more concerned about others. And when that happened, I forgot that I thought that God didn't love me, because I was more assured than ever that God did love me when I started serving Him. So in 2 Kings 4, the story here of the bread, this is a lesson in faith, believing God at His word, faith in love, and a lesson in stewardship. 2 Kings 42, first part says, again, there came a man from Baal Shalisha, and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, full of ears of corn and husk thereof. And he said, give the people they may eat. Well, this man, you get it? Okay. This man represents so many people whose names will never be remembered. The Bible doesn't record this man's name. But this man had an incredible ministry. You may know who Edward Kimball was. It's a name that's written down in history, but it's a name that is largely forgotten by most people. Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher in Chicago who had taught teenage boys. And he had one boy that he didn't believe was saved. And so Edward Kimball would try to encourage him. And one day he went down to the store, a shoe store, where this boy was working. And in the course of time, he led this boy to the Lord. The boy's name was Dwight. Well, later on, Dwight became known as D.L. Moody, Dwight Lyman Moody, who preached, and they said possibly led as many as 100,000 people to the Lord. Preached to well over millions of people, and this in the 1800s. He not only preached in Chicago, but he preached in England as well. His ministry had an impact upon other people. R.A. Torrey was a great preacher of the past. R.A. Torrey had a great ministry and impact upon a man by the name of Mordecai Ham. Mordecai Ham had a great ministry and was preaching down in the Charlotte area back at the first part of the 20th century. And a young man there heard him preaching and came to know the Lord. You may have heard that name, his name. It was Billy Graham. Edward Kimball, a Sunday school teacher for the most part, whose name is lost in history, had an impact upon D.L. Moody, who had an impact upon R.A. Torrey, who had an impact upon Mordecai Ham, who had an impact upon Billy Graham, who's had an impact upon more people for the Lord Jesus Christ than anybody in world history. I mean, he has preached to more people than anybody has ever preached to. And it started with Edward Kimball. We, more than likely, will never be worldwide known as great teachers or preachers or Christians, what have you. But we can have just as much an impact. Edward Campbell has just as much impact as Billy Graham had, because it was his ministry that affected others. And we may be forgotten. This man, you don't know his name. Man from Bel Shalisha. We don't even know where that's at. All right? But he had an impact by giving what he had. This man demonstrates the word Baal. The word Baal, we look at the Old Testament and we see the word Baal and it's a false god. Okay? However, the word Baal itself doesn't mean a false god, it just means master, or owner, or even husband. Later became a name for the Canaanite deity Baal. So when we look at Bel Shalish, don't think that's a pagan name. It's not a pagan name, it's just that what that name means became known later on as a pagan god. Jeremiah 3:14 says, "Return, O faithless sons, declares the Lord, for I am a master to you." So there's the word Baal. God says, I'm a God, a master to you. Or, I will take you one from a city and two from a family, and I'll bring you to Zion. Jeremiah 31:32, "Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers, in the day I took them out by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them." So here's the word Baal used as master and as husband. So, like I say, most of the time we think of the word Baal, we think of an idol, and because most of the time in the Bible it is. But really the word just means master or husband. So Bel Shalisha, Shalisha means to multiply. So the name comes from Bel Shalisha, meaning Bel being master, owner, husband. Shalisha means to multiply. I mentioned the other day that Old Testament names have a lot of meaning to them. And a lot of times it represents the person. Well, this place he came from meant to multiply. He brought basically nothing and had more people there than this would feed. But he said, I'm going to give everything I have and let them eat. And God did what? We multiplied it. Just like the fish and loaves in the New Testament. He multiplied. God can take what little we have and make much of it. And that's what the story here. This man brought what he had, which we would say, well, that's not enough, don't even bother bringing it. And God says, no, that's all I require of you is what you have. I don't require what you don't have. I don't expect us to go out and win the whole world. We just do our part, whatever it might be, and God can multiply that. When Israel was obedient to this covenant, then the Lord, Israel's husband or master and provider, would bless the land. When disobedient towards the covenant, God, they would experience cursings. At the time of Elisha, remember the kingdom had been divided into northern kingdom and southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was known as Israel, the southern kingdom was Judah. And Israel is the one that's suffering the famine, the northern kingdom. That's where Elisha was at, because while the north was wicked, God needed preachers to go to the north. Well, Israel, the northern kingdom, had been disloyal to Jehovah and gone into Baalism, idolatry, and because of that there was famine in the land. There's a lot to write down here. I tried to reword it, but this man, Baal Shalishim, was a worshiper of Jehovah, the true God. And God was the husband of Israel. In the Bible, Old Testament Israel is the bride of Jehovah. In the New Testament, the church is the bride of Christ. And so he was a worshiper. He was coming to the true prophets of God with bread and grain. So here this man knew that Elisha and his followers had need, took what he had. The Lord would miraculously multiply what he gave. And of course that would demonstrate that God alone was the true God. He would meet their needs and multiply their ministries. And that's what we need to understand, is that we don't have the ability to take care of everybody's needs. God doesn't expect us to. But he does expect us to do what we can. And God can take something little and make much of it. Edward Kimball didn't have the opportunity to go throughout all the world and preach the gospel. But he had a burden for one Sunday school student.